Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Copilot Learning Hub. Today, we've got a very special topic because all of you have been asking us about it, the Azure Copilot. But I'm not going to tell you how the Azure Copilot works. Instead, I phoned a friend and have Pierre Roman join us and explain how does the Azure Copilot work, what does it do, and more importantly, what can it do for you? Hi, Pierre. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Donna. How are you?
Awesome. So, tell us about Azure Copilot. This is something you are extremely familiar with, and most people in the world are not.
Yes, so Azure Copilot, which, by the way, is still in preview, so work is still being done on it. It's a Copilot where you get to ask it general purpose questions about your IT environment. So your cloud environment, your hybrid environment, if it's connected to the cloud, basically anything that is comprised or encompassed in your Azure Graph information. So Copilot enables you to tap into that knowledge and tap into all of the documentation about Azure. Well, that's what it does. It answers your questions and helps you do tasks.
Okay, I love that because there are a lot of Azure services out there. I don't even know how many. I think there's more Azure services than there are Copilot experiences personally. And it's hard to find them. And it's also hard to find very specifically, how do you do this very particular thing? I was looking for how do you build an AI agent with orchestration the other day. And I actually stumbled into the Azure Copilot and I thought it was very useful.
Yep.
So that was very cool. Okay, so you've obviously been using this for a while. Can you show us some of the things that you found very useful for your work?
Yes, absolutely. So when we're looking at Copilot, or if I'm looking at the portal right now, it's right there, right in the top. Yep. So Copilot.
Perfect.
So I've got my information about all the subscriptions that I have. And I have to say, don't be worried about exposing things that you're not supposed to see.
Okay.
Copilot is built on top of the governance, the policies, the access controls, everything that you've already set. So if I say, show me all the resources, it's only going to show me the resources that I have access to. That's number one. Number two is that when you start, it gives you a set of suggested prompts because we're all this is new. It's actually still in preview. So what can you do for it? So it'll ask you, can I design? Can I operate? Can I optimize, troubleshoot, and so on? But for our audience, like the IT professionals and the infrastructure people, the operations people, there are very specific things or specific skills that these people normally have to do on a regular basis. So if I go here and say, for example, ask a question that a lot of IT professionals would ask is, how many virtual machines do I have? So I go here, I ask my question or my prompt, and while this is thinking, just realize that context is king when you're writing prompts. The more information you can give Copilot, the more precise the information that it'll bring you back. So in this case, I said, how many virtual machines do I have? But I didn't specify a subscription. I didn't specify a resource group. I just say, how many do I have? So right now it's going through all of my subscriptions. It shows me what the custom query graph query would be. So I can run it. I can run it separately, or I can just hit the run button. And right now it just tells me that I have 22 virtual machines across the selected subscription. And in this case, it's basically all the subscriptions that I have currently in context in the portal. It will also give me suggested prompts based on what I already asked it. So what are the names of the virtual machines, the status, and so on. So I can keep going and say, well, how do those 22, how many are actually running? Because typically you'd have to go into the portal, look at all the virtual machine, or build a PowerShell script or a CLI script, or go to the shell and write down that query and then let it run. But in this case, I'm just going to ask it how many. And again, it shows me the graph, the custom query, and then goes into there and figures out what I need to do first, because there's behind the LLM, behind the Copilot that understands human language, it tries to define what the intent of what you're trying to do. And based on that intent, will try to figure out the skill that it needs to accomplish this. So if it's alert and monitoring, it's one set of skills. If it's just graph queries, it'll do that. If it doesn't know anything like that, or if you're asking a general question, it'll default to documentation. So in this case, I have my 22 machines are currently running and in the selected subscriptions, and they are the first 5 in the list. So I've got 5 machines. Again, it gives me more information in terms of what do you want to do with these? What are the specs of those machines? How can I stop these machines? And I can just say, for example, show me the memory usage for a specific server or one of the ones that is listed here. So it goes there. It starts working on it, trying to determine what I want to do. And in this case, we'll eventually figure out that, oh, you're trying to figure out metrics definition. So it uses the Azure Monitor metrics skill, gives me some information about it. And while I'm reading the information, it keeps working in the background, picking up the information and the details that I asked. It fetches that information and will pop it up on screen for me.
What I like about this is it takes it one step beyond just giving you the answer. It's saying, I think this is what Pierre is trying to do. Let me give him the next few steps. And I really like those follow-up prompts down there at the bottom that says, okay, now do you want to see which ones are running? Now do you want to see which ones have been running a long time, etc. So I think that's really clever because it's taking you through a workflow. It's not just question and answer retrieval, but it's actually trying to guide you through some sort of a flow. So if you're not an Azure expert like you kind of have almost I don't want to say wizard, but it's more of a guide through, okay, once you understand what machines you've got running, you probably want to figure out which are long running, which of these are using the most memory, the most, usage, et cetera, and maybe you want to wind one down or load balance or whatever it is that you'd want to do.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's very cool.
Plus, if you've noticed, I've not once moved anywhere from the home screen of the portal.
Right.
So all of this I could have done manually, but it is literally the Copilot. It's helping me get to the destination I'm trying to get to.
I love that.
And in this case, it showed me the metrics, but it says, do you want to open it into the Metrics Explorer, where if I want to get more metrics out of it, I can add them in here. This is really, really cool. So we've asked a lot of questions about what my environment looks like. But I can also say, so what's the status, which we've already kind of checked out. But I could also say, restart that VM. So now it goes into action mode. This is not an actual thing. This is just what's happening in my head. It determines what I'm trying to do. So it's like, oh, okay, so you're trying to actually affect this. All right, so I've confirmed that you want to restart this machine. Yep, this is the one you want. Yes. And then say yes, no, or reset my selection. If I reset the selection, it gives me a resource selector that I can pick a different machine if I want to and reset it. So in this case, I'm just going to say yes, and it actually starts the reset process. So if I go home right now and go to the status of this machine, it's currently it's running now, but it's being restarted as we speak.
Okay, what I like is it's doing this little automation for you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's literally executing your intent.
Yeah. So once you get information on what you're supposed to be doing, this Copilot can, in many instances, actually do the thing for you if you tell it to.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I like that.
And if it doesn't understand what you're trying to do, it will kind of like guide you or show you some documentation and say, I think this is what you're trying to accomplish. Here's some information, and here are the links of our documentation where you can get more information. Because you know as well as I do that trying to find this very specific like command or a very specific set of information out of the learn.microsoft.com, where all of our documentation is set, it's sometimes not easy because there's so much of it.
Right. No, that's very true, because finding the right page in our Learn docs is challenging. But I did see this one drops you directly to that page. It says, do you want to open this one? I was looking up the responsible AI guidelines, and it took me directly to the page. And I was pretty happy about that. That was great.
Yep. So right now it started. It tells me that it's actually started. I can refresh that and make sure, but let's move on. One of the things that also Copilot can do, and let's start a new chat. Because this Copilot, like every Copilot, has kind of got a limit of how many prompts you can provide in succession, and where it actually retains the context of what it was doing before. So let's start a new one just to make sure that we don't hit that limit. For operations, one of the things that's very important is, because IT professionals, operations folks, they have a different focus, let's say, than developers or management. Their purpose is to keep the lights on, don't break anything, troubleshoot when things go wrong, and let's figure out the health of our environment. So how can Copilot for Azure or Azure Copilot help in those situations? Well, let's say it's been a long weekend. You've been out in a golf course and so on, and you come back on Monday morning. It's easy for us to go in there and say, so how many critical alerts have been fired in the last 24 hours? Because maybe you don't get all the alerts based on, does the alert go to the database group? Does the alert go to the security group? Does the alert go to the infrastructure group? So you can just say, how many critical alerts in the last 24 hours? And it will actually gives me, there's been 5 active alerts in 3 resources with Sev zeros, so critical, in the past 1 day. So I can go and then drill into what that one is. So see what the rule was and where it actually fired, and get the information very, very quickly on those alerts, and then be able to act on it immediately. But typically in this particular case, if I look, let's say, CPU load, it brings me to it, and then will give me the history and everything. So it just helps me navigate all of the information that's in the portal, all of the metrics, all of the alerts that we've already set. So you could have set that in any of the panes in Azure Monitor, in the pane of the resource itself with alerts and monitoring. This is just an easy way for me to ask Azure Copilot, like, show them to me and explain to me how that's going to work. What action should I take? So if there is a rule on that one that says, well, we've spun up this alert because your CPU got pinned, then according to our documentation, according to the knowledge that we have that's built into the LLM, what action should I take? And then it'll go out and get the information I need and then provide it to me. Because Azure Copilot is not just about operation and alert and monitoring and stuff like that. There's also lots of information that it can provide you in terms of learning and upskilling, in terms of financial operations and so on. There's lots of different information in there. So while we were talking, it came back and said, okay, so it understands my concern about the CPU loaded alert rule. And it says, okay, please verify these rules are enabled, check the processing, verify whether the alert look at the history tab of your alert. Like, it gives you hints and procedures and like to do. So that you can address those problems in the future.
I love that you've got yourself a handy little assistant, actually. Because this is
I guess that's why they call it a Copilot.
Yeah, because this is not just a fancy FAQ page or a place where, you know, you just have all of your resources in one and then you have to go hunt and peck. It actually is guided directions through these very specific tasks that you're trying to do. Like, hey, I've got an alert. What should I do about it? It kind of guides you through that, through the various resources that are already there in the Azure portal, they're just very, very hard to find unless you know what you're looking for.
Exactly.
I love that. Okay, Pierre, this was very enlightening for me. I learned a whole bunch of new tricks. So we're going to ask you to come back and share with us more learning, upskilling, and of course, FinOps, which everybody cares about. Like, how much money am I spending? So thank you so much for being with us today. And to everyone else, tune in next time for Copilot Learning Hub. Hello, and welcome back to Copilot Learning Hub. We dragged Pierre back onto the show because he taught us so many things about Azure Copilot in terms of how to do operations, how to get guided through operations, how to learn how to do operations when you've never done operations in your life, that we say, I bet there's more learning and upskilling things that Azure Copilot can do for us. So, Pierre, thank you so much for joining us again and coming to share your wisdom with our audience.
Well, thank you, Donna, for having me again. This is actually great because we're always learning. There's always more to learn, and there are so many services and so many possibilities in Azure that being an expert in all of them is almost impossible.
That is very true. So how can Azure Copilot help you with your learning and skilling journey? I'm so curious because it's a huge topic for everybody in our industry right now, right?
Well, not only is it a huge topic for industry, it's a feedback that we've gotten, at least that I've gotten from our audience, that we come up with these things so fast that sometimes it's hard for them to keep up. Like, they're just learning containers, and now there's AKS, and then there's this, and then there's that. And like it keeps iterating at a pace where maybe they don't have the time in their environment because, of course, they have to keep the lights on and they have to operate their environment. So they may not have that amount of time in terms of learning experience. So they have to learn on, like, while they're doing it. So how can we help? How can Azure Copilot help?
I love it. So how can Azure Copilot help? This is a very exciting conversation.
Actually, if I look at my Copilot here, I sped up my first AKS cluster in demo/production online earlier this week. And I know nothing about AKS. So I can easily say, how many AKS clusters do I have? And of course, it'll go out and look, just like we said in the last episode, it looks at the graph, the Azure graph, resource graph, and then it queries it and say, okay, so it'll count how many AKS clusters is it and give me the information. But really I don't know anything. Like, I've set it up, but I'm running into issues. I'm running into load issues. I'm running into multiple things. So I can say, how do I scale an AKS cluster? And it'll go out and give me some information again, but it'll do more than that. It'll go into the Learn documentation and start providing me, like, step by step as to what can I do in order to scale an AKS cluster. And I'm a moron when it comes to AKS cluster. Normally, I defer to, like, Stephen or Paul or other guys in my team that are experts and are phenomenal at that. I've got other areas I need to concentrate on. But every once in a while, I need to do this.
Yeah. No, that's fair.
Maybe it's for a demo. Maybe it's for a small project. So right now, as you can see, it's searching through our documentation and trying to determine what to do. And will eventually give me the steps I need to take. And right now, it's giving me a couple information. So to scale an AKS cluster, and I'm not going to read this for you, but it does give me an Azure CLI as to how can I increase the node count on my AKS cluster. But maybe I prefer PowerShell, so it also gives me the PowerShell command to do this. And then it says, okay, to learn more about this option, then it basically summarizes the documentation we have and gives me the 5 or 6 links that are the most pertinent to the question I just asked.
Okay.
So right now,
this is great because it gives you very specific docs pages to go to, not just the overall umbrella, not like learn.com/AKS. But it says, per your question, here are 5 actual resources to go to.
Yes.
Yeah, that's cool.
And it's not just about how can I operate the stuff I already have. So if I ask a questions like, what database service should I use to read heavy NoSQL workloads? And I'm not a data person.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't know. What service should I use? Should I use SQL, Postgres? I don't know. So I'll ask that question, and it'll go out in our documentation based on what we have, what we know. Give me suggestions. So right now it does tell me Azure Cosmos DB's distributed NoSQL database platform that's variously consistency options, blah, blah, blah. Gives me all the information I need and some links to understanding the NoSQL databases, which is great. So I can learn about it. I can go and read about it. But now if I want to deploy one, I'll just go out and say, well, show me how to deploy this. Because I may not have time to go out and learn and test and read all the documentation and the step-by-step. I just want to say, I need to set this up quickly. Maybe it's for a proof of concept. Regardless what the end result wants to be, like I just need to get this done now.
Right.
So it's generating CLI scripts, because I did specify in this case, and I mentioned in the last episode that context is king. Mm-hmm. If I had said using PowerShell, it would have generated the PowerShell commands. But in this case, I said CLI. And now it says, okay, so sure, here's a CLI commands to deploy Azure Cosmos DB and an app service, because they're dependent. It knows that. So say first, create the DB account. I can run it. I can copy it. Then create the service plan, create the web app, create the settings to include Cosmos DB connection string, configure the deployment source. But it also tells me in those scripts, there's a lot of variables. So please replace the variables with actual values you want to use. Mm-hmm. And then I can just run them, copy them elsewhere, modify those variables, run them, and deploy a Cosmos DB and app service in my environment, when 5 minutes ago I had no idea where to start with doing that.
I love that. It taught you how to do V1.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the magic things about these Copilot things, where if you're an expert, it helps you expert faster. But if you're a novice, it helps you get to V1 way faster than you now digging through 13 documentation files and trying to figure out where the resources in the Azure portal itself.
Yes.
Nice. Okay.
It's pretty phenomenal. It's pretty phenomenal. And it doesn't even have to be very specific to a technology. So I could ask it, help me design my cloud architecture. And I want to follow what I read about Azure security benchmarks, because security is a big thing. Security should be part of every project and every operation and everything we do.
Right.
So it goes out and it searches through our documentation for Azure security benchmark, and then it'll give me some information or links as to what I should read, how I should go about designing something that complies with our Azure security benchmark and so on.
No, and you're right. Security is everything. Pri 0, Pri 1, Pri 0 and Pri 1. Yep.
So here's when it's finished thinking, it says, oh, to design your cloud architecture following the security benchmark, you should adopt the security benchmark, the MCSB. It provides your guidance, again, gives you the further reading. So designing area for security, overview of security controls, introduction to cloud security benchmark. So I didn't ask it about anything very specific in terms of technologies.
Right.
I asked it, like, how do I address this? And it gives me more information. So it helps me learn things I didn't know I needed to learn.
That's right. Because it's that guided learning again.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. I love that.
But learning is not the only thing that is important.
Mm-hmm.
In the last episode, we talked about operations, alerts, monitoring, and this one, right, so far, we've talked about learning and upskilling. Because really, it is upskilling. Whatever level you're at, it helps you jump up.
Right.
So if you're a novice, it helps you get better. If you're an expert, it helps you get better, but just do it faster. But one of the things that we all have to be careful is FinOps, or operations in terms of cost operations.
Mm-hmm.
I have to admit, I have in the past, for a demo, like in front of a user group somewhere, and it's like, oh, so let me show you how I can deploy a VM with like 32 cores and 4 terabytes of memory, and let's make it a scale set of 10 of those, and like and show them how easy it was and how performance worked on those. And then the demo was over, so I closed the lid of my laptop. Thank you very much, and I left. Then at the end of the month, I got the bill.
Oh, no.
Yes.
No.
And of course, it wasn't in a Visual Studio subscription, demo subscription. It was an actual production subscription, so we had to pay the bill.
I'm going to call this episode, and then at the end of the month, I got the bill.
So one of the things we can do is, for example, in Azure Copilot, is say, how much am I spending on virtual machines in context, this particular subscription? Because really, this subscription is a demo subscription, and it's the only subscriptions where I, as Pierre Roman with my account, have got rights to actually see what the billing is.
Oh, that's right. I like that, because that is security, but also very helpful for you to know how much you're spending.
Yes.
Okay.
But as we mentioned in the last episode, Azure Copilot will only show you the information that you have access to based on governance, access control, and so on. So you don't have to worry about exposing information to people in your organization that may not have a need for it. So as long as your role-based access control are set properly, you're fine. So in this case, I can go and see, so in this particular subscription, I have spent $147 for virtual machines from May 1st to May 8th, which is today.
Yep.
So it gives me a list of my top 10, the percentage of the charge, and so on. So it basically just went out, got the info, and pumped it up for me. But I can say, for example, forecast my spend in the next 3 months.
Oh, hey, that's clever.
Yeah. So it uses historical data that's stored in your subscription.
Mm-hmm.
Looks at that information, extrapolate based on the usage that you've had, like the average usage if you had, and then will tell you that between May 1st and July 31st, I'm expected to spend $13,019.08 USD. Please note that this forecast did not include credits and taxes. If you have further questions, please let me know. So I could say, how do I reduce my cost? And it'll go out, look at my resources. Are there resources that are underutilized? Like, do I have a very large VM that's sitting at 5% usage?
Okay, so question, how accurate do you think this forecast is?
The forecast is a statistical analysis forecast. So it doesn't know whether or not tomorrow you're going to spend 10,000 machines.
Agreed.
Or spin up another complete new workload. So it's based on the information that you have currently.
Okay. So plus you need a bit of history, right, to do that forecasting thing.
Yes.
Because you, who are a consistent user, you're like, this is a thing I do every month. On occasion, you're going to do something strange, like leaving that resource running for 24 hours. And then at the end of the month, you got the bill. But in general, we kind of do the same thing every month over and over, unless there's some new random special project.
Exactly. Yeah. Plus, if you've got proper governance and policies, the people in your environment should not be able to spin machines that are too big, that are in the wrong region. Like your governance will help you contain that potential extra spend based on error, for example.
Right.
But also, it does gives you a list or a link to the advisor directly into Azure Copilot.
Right.
So it can look at that and say, oh, you can right size or shut down underutilized machine. And then, so not only will it give you, because you mentioned the forecast, like how accurate is it?
Yeah.
If you were going to forecast for your own business, you would look at all the costs that you've incurred in the last 6 months or 1 year. You'd put that in an Excel spreadsheet and you'd do some magic to extrapolate what it's going to look like for the next 6 months or 3 months or whatever period you're looking at.
Yeah.
It's no different, except it does it for you.
Yeah, I get it. I like that because if you were going to do a forecast, you need a set of data, and then Excel does a bunch of forecasting for you. Here, you're getting it in line, in context, without having to go to Excel and do it.
Exactly.
Okay, I love it. This is great.
The more context you put into your prompt, the more precise it's going to be. So forecast how much I'm going to spend on my Cosmos DB database for the next month. So based on the usage it's already had, based on the billing, past billing, we'll take all that information and use it. So
I love it.
All of the things you can do with Azure Copilot. And first of all, that's growing.
Yes.
Because we've already established that we have a ton of services and capabilities within Azure. And that's growing.
Yep.
So the LLM helps understand what your intent and what you're trying to do. Then it passes it on to a skill, or so alert and monitoring, financial information, resource graph query. Those skills are growing because all of the product groups that are running Azure Backup or resiliency or observability or any of added services that we're adding, they're currently, because we're still in preview, they're currently finalizing the skill that's needed to operate that particular product.
I love it. Yeah.
And that's being fed into Azure Copilot.
I really like just how every time I use this product, I learn a bunch of new things. And I see the product change week over week. I see it being able to generate me new things, guide me through a new flow. The other day, I was trying to make this AI assistant, and it actually guided me to not just the place in Azure Portal, the Azure AI Studio, but it also guided me to a set of docs to use to build using prompt flow.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because if it doesn't have the skill, or if the intent that you're telling it, it doesn't know how to interpret,
that's right,
then it'll default to a RAG model that basically covers all of our documentation and present you with what's most likely to be what you're looking for.
Right. I like that it falls back. It says like, hey, I don't have that information in context of the Azure portal, but we do have it in documentation. And that orchestration, I think, is really clever. I think it's very helpful. Awesome. Thank you so much, Pierre, for coming and sharing all of these insights about Azure Copilot that I personally did not know, and I know many of our audience members also did not know. So we really appreciate your expertise, and we can't wait to see Azure Copilot exit preview and hit GA where it belongs.
Should be soon.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Stay tuned next time for Copilot Learning Hub. Thank you. Hello, and welcome back to Copilot Live, as we're calling the show now, by the way. So since the launch of Copilot Learning Hub, we've realized that we need to go out and get more videos, more tutorials, more very practical step-by-step things on how to do all the things with Copilot. So we're starting to grab members of our community who are Copilot leaders, dragging them on the show and making them tell us how they're doing the thing with Copilot across their businesses. So the first up today, we have our good friend from the UK, Chris Huntingford. Hello.
Hey, thank you for having me. This is very exciting. I feel like I got corralled onto this, but
you definitely got corralled. You got voluntold. You got cajoled. You know, all of the verbs. So let's tell the audience a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, no worries. So I work as the Director of Innovation at a Microsoft partner in the UK, but I do a lot of community work, so working with community members on Copilot and things like that. And right now deploying Copilot to a number of organizations. So public sector, legal, there's quite a few, which is really interesting. And they actually, it's been a hell of a journey, right? Because I've discovered a bunch of things that I didn't think I would discover. So I'm hoping I'll get to share those with you today.
Okay, so just some backstory for you. You originally worked in the dynamic space. You worked in the Power Platform low-code space. Yeah. So this concept of governance, right, and deploying a newfangled thing is not a new concept for you. You've been through this for the last decade, 2 decades, some large number of years, right?
Yeah. In fact, even when I was at Microsoft, it was the same sort of thing, right? Like we were always talking about making things and never really focusing on the governance piece. And I think this time around, like when Office was released, there wasn't a whole lot of governance. It was retrofitted with Power Platform. Sort of similar. I think this time around, they've really thought about how to look after what people are doing here. So actually, it's been great to see a lot of the content coming out and actually how we can help manage and help these organizations look after their people. And obviously, when using AI, it can be a little bit scary.
That's right. So I think it's so important that you're focusing in on the governance of Copilot, because that's not a topic we've talked about here on Copilot Live yet. So I would love to hear your spiel. What is the process you use when you think about advising these companies on governance? And what are some of the things that you've seen already that seems to work well and some things that did not work well?
Yeah, there have been some things that did not work well. I'm gonna do a bit of a screen share, and hopefully this is all coming through. But you know, as somebody who's used to structured data, right, like Dataverse and those types of things, you know, it's relatively easier, in my opinion, to manage it. But when Copilot came out and it started to kind of look under the hood at things like emails and documents and all of that jazz, you kind of forget that actually a lot of this stuff has been forgotten inside a tenant, right? And we're all kind of used to just sharing things all the time. And one of the things I discovered actually is that Copilot acts as rocket fuel for searching for data. So if you're looking for something, normally in Microsoft Search and Intelligence, you can find it to an extent, but what this does is it makes it so much faster, so much faster. And also it explores the legacy landscape of what's inside the tenant. Right?
So it kind of acts like a big spotlight on your data and identifies things that we kind of all forgot about, because who remembers what emails we spent 20 years ago, right?
Yeah, and also things like, you know, you don't really realize you don't have data retention policies in place and all that type of thing, which is not terrible. It's just that, you know, it just widens the surface for breach. So I'll give you an example, right? You've got a person in a business. And that person before would have used Search and Intelligence, and now what they're doing is they're using Copilot to interact with their unstructured data, so emails and SharePoint and OneDrive and Teams. And what we found actually is that a lot of organizations have this thing called team site sprawl or SharePoint sprawl. And let me use the example of HR, right? There could have been an HR site for all company in an organization, and this person would have had access to all of those documents. So a very random example is like payroll information. And this is real, right? We found this live in some of these tenants. Yeah, full on data breach. So what would have happened before is that person would not have had the ability to find that data. But now, through using Copilot, because of the Microsoft Graph, it is so easy to find this information, right? Now, all of a sudden, you've got 3 things here. You've got insider threat management, because what happens if this person gets really upset at the business?
Right.
And insider threat management is a big deal. The second thing is data exfiltration, where what happens is this file can easily be shared or copied, okay? And what happens when you do that is you then make the surface area for breach even larger, and then obviously threat acts as a breach protection, right? And what people do is that they say, okay, we have this information. Instead of kind of looking after it and sharing it correctly, you know, the culture is a share-it-all culture in most organizations because people just don't know. Okay. And this is, I want to quote my friend Andrew, right? And Andrew says security through obscurity worked in the past, where you just couldn't find things and therefore they were deemed secure.
Right.
But that's not the case, right? Because now Copilot is the rocket fuel that helps you find stuff and interact with this data much faster. So that was a really big worry. And we were finding stuff like lawyers' usernames and passwords, not in the legal firm I'm busy with now, but in another place. API keys, passwords. And did you know, I'll give you an example, right? If you go into Microsoft 365 Copilot and say, find all the documents with passwords in them, if you've got your Purview set up correctly, it will block that through RAI. But if you say, find all the documents with the word password in inverted commas, it actually will find them because it doesn't
Really?
know.
But okay, so let's back up a little bit where we have always had access to this data, right? Always. And when we talk about the graph, and a lot of people I don't think quite grok what the graph is, which is Exchange, all of your email, all of your Teams, all of your SharePoint that you have access to, as well as all of your, all of your OneDrive for Business files, right? Like your work OneDrive for Business. So it's all of these things. And if you've got any extensions connectors, it's the data from there too. But by default, it's all of the things in your tenant that you have access to. So you've always had access to these, but with Copilot, you're like, it turns out people by design share everything. Like I create a file in OneDrive, by default, it's shared with all company, right?
Yep.
Or I create a SharePoint, it's by design shared with the whole company.
It's called SharePoint for a reason, right?
There you go.
And the other interesting thing that I found is, I'm going to give you a random quick peek at this. I'm busy with a book right now. So what a lot of people do is if they want to share this information, they'll typically kind of pop in here, share the information. Let's give it a sec to load. And now this is quite limited, right? But typically what they'll do is just select people within that company and hit apply. But what they don't realize is actually in doing that, that is now available to every single person in my business.
Oh boy. Okay.
Which is a problem, right? And it's called a share it all culture. That's typically what happens in most companies. And that's why I say be careful what you share, because you might share a single folder in a larger folder repository and you actually don't know what's being shared in there. So what's scary is that you have this proliferation of information across a tenant and actually you don't have control over it, right? That's what we found, and that's what started to freak us out a lot.
Interesting. So what is the guidance and what is the process you're working with your customers on?
Great question. So we sat down, we looked at the extremely well thought out Microsoft documentation. I've got to hand it to the team. I'm quite critical of documents that come out of Microsoft from a governance perspective, only because it's just been difficult. But I think this time, really good work, right?
Love it.
So we broke it into three areas. So you've got your center of enablement, which contains your guardrails, and then the kind of softer things you need to do, like building champions networks, and then you're driving user adoption through the information you discover there. But the real key thing before you can do anything is to get those guardrails in place. Right.
So as you're working with them, what are some of the tools that you're using? Because I'm sure there's no one size fits all. There's, this thing for that and that thing for this, but you're quite big on Microsoft Purview. And I'd love to hear about how you guide people to arrive at that conclusion.
Oh, totally. So effectively what we found is that you just need to ask three questions, right? You say, well, where is your information? Okay. What information is being stored and who has access to it? Those are really three key things from a guardrails perspective. And understanding who has access actually is probably the largest one. Now, you're absolutely right. Okay, so Purview is one way. Now, there are some external things like you can grant reduced site access into some of the SharePoint sites, and that's located in M365. But Purview, to me, is like that central driving hub and that central point where you will go, and that's your kind of dashboard of what's within your business and what's compliant and what's not.
Okay.
And what Microsoft did really well is they took Azure Purview for data, which was very much about like structured data and data mapping, and they've munged it together with the compliance center. So now you have this amazing solution, this really incredible solution that allows you to understand where your data is, how to protect your data, obviously using monitoring and prevention to stop people doing silly stuff, but also you have this wider governance view of what's going on in your business. It's pretty wicked.
I like that because it is the one-stop shop where you actually take the action, but you also govern to make sure that it's working, that you can go through the entire cycle, the end-to-end.
Oh, for sure. And actually, there are some steps in a lot of the documentation that you can get from Microsoft that actually tell you some of the things you need to do. It's not all of them, but it's a good amount to get you going, right?
Okay.
So do you want to see it?
I definitely want to see it.
Cool. All right, I'm going to drag my screen across. So this over here is the front sort of facing end of Microsoft Purview. And there's quite a bit in here, right? So I don't want people to panic, but just as an example, when you go to view all solutions, you can kind of see where things live and why they live there, right? So you've got data governance and all sorts of wonderful things. But what I am going to do is I want to show you something very cool, and that's the AI Hub. Now, this is in preview, so it's important to know that this will grow, and I actually have a customer using this right now. It's pretty wicked. And what they actually do is they talk to you about things like bad actors in your organization. So if people are using AI for good, effectively, or being responsible. Yeah. Now, this does take some setup, right? Like, this is not a turnkey thing. So you can actually see I've got things like my sensitive information type set up, and I've got my sensitivity labeling set up. But what's cool is that this gives you a front end to all of the information. Okay. It is really easy to set up when you get going after you've done all the core work, right? And I want to give you another example. Some of the core work that you need to do actually involves the way in which you manage and track documentation and categorize it. So all I did, this is a Word document, and you can just see I put government decision, like as a random set of words. And
that should trigger all kinds of alerts, right? Government decision.
And totally. And these are what you call, these are data classification, sensitivity labeling at least. And through this, I can control who has access to this document. So if it is a sensitive information type, okay, and even if it's shared sometimes, I can still block it using the rules I set up behind these sensitivity labels. So it's really important. Now, it's not as simple as going to pop in some labels and hoping for the best. You actually have to have a plan. If you do not have a plan, I highly recommend getting one, because this will change the way people work in your organization. And it's really important because this will obfuscate data from people using Microsoft 365 Copilot. Okay, so that's really key. So whatever you do over here, whatever people select over here, you can also do it automatically. That is going to roll up into your dashboarding and compliance dashboards over here. So it's extremely important to make sure the core is set up first. And again, there is a great way to start in following these rules over here.
Okay, so, I like this. Yeah. Okay, so this is the framework. You're like, start here, then find this in the dashboard, then set this part up. Okay. Because otherwise, looking at that dashboard, there's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot. It can be quite intimidating.
It is terrifying, and this is like a drop in the ocean, depending on who in your IT organization is kind of wanting to get involved. But what I did find is actually it's extremely informative, and also it actually alerts you when terrible things are happening. Hopefully, not terrible things are happening,
but just normal business things, right? Because that's just expected. Where when you've worked at a company, any company, whether it's a humongous company like Microsoft or a smaller company like some of the legal firms, there's always things going on because people are creating data every single second. Like every second, new data is being created.
Yeah, that whole data exfiltration thing is really scary, right? Because you can proliferate terrible data across an organization, and then that affects Copilot. Like, let me give you an example. If I'm in a legal org and I create a contract, okay, and that contract has got some clauses that haven't been as well thought out, and I copy that contract into another folder. Now what will happen is that's bad data that's proliferated more than once. So when you're searching and when you're asking Copilot to do things for you, like use this document to build that, you're then proliferating bad information again.
Right.
So actually, you have to really think about this.
So it's not enough to just say cite your sources. You have to make sure those sources are, first of all, legit, and second, the ones you should be citing in the first place.
Totally. And I think, look, if you get this right in the beginning and you get the guardrails in relatively quickly and you think about it, you don't run the risk of wrecking your data. But what we have to do is start thinking about things like data retention and where data is stored. Like, should it be stored there? Do you give everyone access to Microsoft Teams? Do you have Teams channel proliferation across your business?
Yeah.
The other thing is understand the data you have. So don't just think it's sensitive or non-sensitive. That's not how this works. Like if you're in a medical company and I'm in an education organization, the data is different. Fine. PII and PI data is still the same thing, but I might not be tracking information the same way. And then also getting that plan involved. So actually drawing that out. And I think Microsoft do a good job of doing this, where they say, do these three things first. And if you do those, then you can do the crawl, walk, run type thing. So this is how I would recommend people get started, is actually understand what is in your tenant. Don't turn a blind eye, because if you do, and you turn on Copilot, you run the risk terrible data proliferation.
I love that. And this is a good way to then do the second part that I'm going to ask you to come back and talk about, which is how do you deploy Copilot with rings of release, et cetera, et cetera. But for today, get your data in order, figure out your governance strategy, and you've got some homework for everybody, from what I understand.
Yes, your homework is to go and learn Purview. Actually, just go and look under the hood, go and get educated. I think it's really key to make sure that we think about widening our technical intensity and not just thinking about Copilot as a turnkey solution. So anyone that's technical and wants to grow, I would definitely say it's worth looking at that Purview. If you are less inclined to go that route, there'll be another slot, hopefully, if it all works out, where I can show you the enablement stuff. And actually, that's more for like change management and that type of thing. But
I get
it's really important.
Before this data security and governance part, there is no change management because you're not going to deploy Copilot, right? Yeah.
If you don't do this, you will need triple change management.
Right, exactly, to change manage 3 different times. Awesome. Chris, it's been such a joy to talk about this. Thank you so much for sharing all of your experience. And this is real life stuff that all of you out there should be doing as you're thinking about implementing Copilot in your organization. So till next time, join us again for Copilot Live.